As I'm sure everybody is well aware, this is the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and, of course, of the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we have today with us Dr. Masao Tomonaga, and from Nagasaki. And we'll be taking him around various places in the UK later this week. And I should mention also that he did a presentation at lunchtime here, and it's now midnight in Japan. And he just arrived in the UK yesterday, so go easy on him. But I will introduce him briefly and our other speakers. So he was 2 years old, in fact, when the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, so he doesn't have direct memories of it. But he devoted his subsequent career as a medical doctor to tending for the victims of the bomb and to researching the effects of radiation on human health. And that's what he's going to be focusing on today. And our other main speaker is Susie Boniface. Susie is a journalist who has been a journalist at, I think, almost every major newspaper in the UK. But the relevance of Susie today is that she has been campaigning for about 20 years with regard to, well, she'll tell you all about it, but nuclear tests that the British military carried out in the South Pacific, which also had long-term radiation effects on various people. So as well as, well, by the way, she has a book which is called Exposed, and we'll have some copies of that on sale downstairs after the event if you're interested. It'll be £20, and you're going to need either cash or PayPal, apparently. And to keep order, we have Barry Buzan, who is Emeritus Professor of International Relations at LSE. And so Barry has a long and distinguished career as an expert in international relations, focusing particularly on China and Japan, and I think it's fair to say Russia. So he is going to moderate tonight's discussion. And with that, I will leave them to get started. So Tomonaga Sensei is going to go first.
I have no habit to sleep on standing. But Japanese people often sleep in the ground traffic. That might be, maybe our autonomous nervous system is weak, a little bit weak than white people. Many people are sleeping in the evening. Well, this year we marks 80th anniversary of atomic bombing on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, first and second. And nowadays, the last one, Nagasaki is the last one. We wish this continues forever. And today I would like to summarize humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons by this Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation lecture. I will summary of the human consequences of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We learned many lessons for Homo sapiens to end the nuclear weapon age. So you know, almost all of you know the two different type of atomic bombing. Bombs were used for first and second detonations. Hiroshima bomb made of uranium and Nagasaki plutonium. Only 10% of the nuclear materials were actually detonated. In case of Hiroshima bomb, only 850 to 900 grams detonated. That devastated Hiroshima city. Under the mushroom cloud, you see some land area of Hiroshima city on the left side. On the right, Nagasaki, you can't see the landscape. This is also 1 kilogram out of 10 kilogram detonated. So this is a map of Nagasaki on the left hand, and this circle are 500 meter consecutively, and 3,000 meter, 3 kilometer is the maximum area of devastation. And there were 3 major energy detonated by the bomb, and the first one, this comprises 70% of one Nagasaki bomb, and the blast wind reached 3.5 kilometers by destroying almost all Japanese-style wooden houses, and some concrete buildings remained. And the second one is heat rays. This is about 15 to 20% of the energy, and the radiation only 15%. But this had the most devastating effect on human being, radiation on human being. So please carefully look fireballs, and from this fireball, after detonation in 1 minute, the major radiation rays were gamma rays and neutrons. And gamma rays hits even a human being inside Japanese-style wooden houses. But the roof considerably shielded the radiation. So maybe 80%, 70% pass through to hit human being. Interestingly, neutrons hit directly also the ground surface, where metals, soils, and stones are distributed. So these materials induce secondary gamma rays. So it is very difficult to calculate individual those exposed to radiation, very difficult. So we must mix 3 rays, direct neutrons, gamma rays, and the secondary neutrons. So complicated. So about 80,000 hibakushas were carefully asked, where were you at the time of bombing? What part of the building were you? Or what place you were walking or existing on the surface of ground? And another radioactive materials come down from the mushroom cloud, which was spread to the east in case of Nagasaki by the strong west wind. This wind further went east to nearby prefecture, Kumamoto. And radioactive fallouts are coming down to the surface. So if you are here, you will receive some radioactive fallouts. Recently, our university group, a lady doctor, discovered Nagasaki plutonium radioactive materials were existing inside the various kinds of organs in the autopsy, the dead body dead body autopsied after atomic bombing. So in that complicated status, autopsy were fairly, in many cases, performed. So U.S. Military doctors collected these material organs to United States, and they researched very carefully. But they didn't find any such deep organ distribution of Nagasaki plutonium inside organs. So bladder, prostate, liver, bone, cartilage, kidney, lungs, in every organ, plutonium particle was observed. This is proved by the black straight line of film, X-ray film exposure by the electron. Electron is plutonium's radiation type, electron. So if you develop this X-ray film, you can find exposed particles of electron from plutonium particle. Okay, this is clear for you. So this lady doctor proved for the first time in the world the existence of atomic bomb material inside the dead body. So this person, autopsied person, might have aspirated open air, aspirated plutonium particles, not detonated, just fall down. So plutonium, plutonium exerts electron beam every 20 hours or 30 hours in a dark room. So that's why the X-ray film were exposed. So this is a proof of deep organ exposure but the calculation of radiation dose from these particles was so minute. We so far consider that this deep organ exposure could not induce disease if this person survived disease, but actually exposed to radiation. This is 2 days before the bombing photos. My house was about central part of Nagasaki is here. This was aimed at original target, but my house was about less than 1 kilometers. But the bomb floated to the north by the strong west wind, and finally detonated above 600 meter high. Not sleeping. So this is 2 days after bombing. So northern part of Nagasaki city was devastated. Almost 100%, 10 minutes, okay. And the point I survived here, this is about 2.5 kilometers. So my medical school from the back view, and you see about 80% to 90% of mountain surfaces previously covered with woods were burned out. So this is the second day photographs taken by army photographers. On the first day, we have no photos at all, There are several types of complete burning of human body. White bones, black bodies, and very severe burns, mother and child, and a lady who received directly from front. Her skin after 10 minutes, 15 minutes dropped because the burning depth is so deep, so skin could not remain. So this is not a photograph, but painting, drawing by hibakusha, remaining the scene as a memory of her scene. So from the firestones, people are escaping to nearby bridge on the river, and they already felt strong thirsty. So they jumped into river, and most of them died there. So my house is a yellow zone, and this is only one photograph. I see my former buildings, roof remaining. And this area is clearly seen as a devastated area, very close to the central station. Yeah. After 15 minutes, this area became severe burn. So another angles, my house here, and the second largest cathedral are also the roof thrown out. And the Nagasaki River, 400 history of trade with European countries, Portugal, Spain, Italy, 400 years ago. And this area was totally Catholic area. My ancestor was also Catholic, but now I'm a Buddhist. So larger magnification. So this is also a memory painting, and the mother tried to dig the wall, soil wall, and but in this explanation, she failed to take out her baby. In my case, my mother could succeeded in taking me out of our house and run away to a nearby shrine. This is a scene like hell in Japanese old painting, Heian era. The two people are walking on hell. So this boy burned totally the back, and he spent on this position 1.5 years, bed life. But finally, she survived and became age 84 when he died, and he became activist in nuclear abolition movement, especially in United Nations assemblies. His skin recovered fairly well, but not real skin recovery. It is wound tissue. You can see some shining surface. And after 2-3 years of fairly calm years after bombing, hibakusha encountered the first quick rise of leukemia. Especially children started to develop first. Every year, in one school, from one class, 1 or 2 leukemia patients. This is very rare phenomenon. Usually, only 1 or 0 per year from entire elementary school, more than 150,000 pupils. So this a long 15 years period was the early phase of leukemia occurrence. And after leukemia began to cease gradually, solid cancers like mammary cancers in young ladies and thyroid cancers, adults, yeah, took place. Moreover, psychological damage was very strong. By using WHO General Health Questionnaire, GHQ scoring system, 12 means the maximum severe psychological damage. And in case of those survivors, less than 2 kilometers, depression, PTSD, etc., raised the score almost 11, mean 11. So my area was here, and those people are still have long term. Long term means 50 years, half century, almost lasting effect of psychological. So this is most typical radiation effect. That is hair loss. We call in medical term epilepsy. This is the damage to bone marrow, right upper and the left lower colon. Both organs are totally irradiated and damaged. So bone marrow cannot produce blood cells, and the colon anymore can absorb water, nutrients, and so on. So many people died of this acute radiation sickness, acute ARS. So I explained this graph too. So this is a summary of 78 years observation by our university. The first phase of leukemia, and now we are looking at MDS. This is the myelodysplastic syndrome, which developed to AML after 3-4 years. And so this is almost similar to leukemia. So we are looking second leukemia. This is the elderly type of leukemia, And nowadays, various solid cancers are developing. This plateau curve never show declining after 80 years. This year, 80 years. So we concluded that the radiation effect continues for one's total lifelong effect. I reported this results in 13 years ago in Oslo in the first United Nations conference on the inhumane nature of atomic bombs on human beings. And this time at the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony, on the second day of ceremony, I attended the forum to discuss about how to overcome this present ongoing nuclear risk, mainly raised by Russia by threatening Ukraine and NATO nations. We might use nuclear weapons actually. So I stop. This is the final leukemia data on radiation dose effect. The dose is higher and higher, the higher the leukemia, access leukemia cases went up, like this line, not straight. And this is cancer data about those response curves. 100 millisievert, the lowest dose, which is statistically significant, 100 millisievert. This is 1,000 millisievert, and 100 millisievert first dot shows statistically significant increase of leukemia. So leukemia is a very sensitive disease which is induced by atomic bomb radiation. So why such a long-term, lifelong effect continues? Our hypothesis is called organ stem cell theory. Organ stem cell are existing all over the organs, and this hair follicle, keratin, black substance, or we Japanese black substance. You Caucasian people not black, but these pigments forms hair, hard hairs, but these hair-forming cells die due to high dose radiation, and the hair, all hair drop out. But here is bulge stem cell which is remaining. Maybe around 10 cells remains, and they again to divide and spread and reproduce even hair pigments. So new hair comes out. If possibility is very low, but if the person survived successfully. So in the bone marrow, we have stem cell here. Stem cell is the mother cells of red blood cells and white blood cells. And they get mature, they get mature red cells, white cells. These stem cells is the target of radiation. And nowadays, all types of human leukemia originates in these stem cells. So our stem cell hypothesis is, I believe, correct. And we partially proved that these white cell, stem cell carrying abnormal chromosomes here, and the red cell, stem cell also the same chromosome abnormality. So this means the common ancestor stem cell are same target of atomic bombing. Dr. Nagai is our radiation professor. He was developed leukemia half months before atomic bombing. Already he was suffering from chronic myeloid leukemia. So he survived 5 years since the diagnosis and died. He wrote many reports and novels. Very famous doctor. After 10 years after the atomic bombing, Noel and Hungerford, the University of Pennsylvania, discovered this tiny, compared to normal one, tiny chromosome. This can be found every case of CML worldwide, every case. So this minute chromosome means something fundamental abnormality of this disease. Finally, in 1985, such abnormal chromosome is actually a conjugation or fusion of two different genes, different genes. These genes become devil genes, malignant, disease-inducing genes. Okay, so these genes called BCR-ABL, tyrosine kinase, a kind of enzyme, can stimulate stem cells. Stem cells begin to divide eternally. So the white blood cell count is more than 200,000. So if the drug, STI, the new drug, which can block the enzyme activity, stem cell began to cease division. And now this drug is widely used, and widely used for the treatment of CML. So the survival curve is now 88%, even after 10 years. So some of them were cured. So this new drug is nominated as candidate of Nobel Medical Award. So I must conclude my talk today. Our research over half century proved that atomic bomb radiation is inhumane weapons. We must eradicate these weapons in future. So far, we are not successful in eradicating such nuclear weapons, as you know very well. Still active as a tool for counter attack to enemy invasion by nuclear weapons. So this status is nuclear deterrence policy. If this status continues forever, we keep maintaining nuclear weapons. And finally, we encounter erroneous explosion inducing nuclear war or actual anti-enemy by using nuclear weapons. So we must be, we hibakusha, very anxious about this. So nuclear weapon possessing nations, people should carefully whether you should continue this policy forever, or you will stop possessing these nuclear weapons very recently. Thank you very much.
I'm very sorry, I'm going to apologize in advance. I don't have the level of expertise of Dr. Tomonaga, and I certainly can't do it in my second language. I am in awe that you managed to do that in yours. Congratulations. I hope everyone's not too hot. I'll try and whistle through this as quickly as I can, and we can all get on to the drinks. The world could end as we sit here tonight. We all think it probably won't, because we depend on our governments and the people within them to be basically decent and to keep us safe. After all, they do know what could happen, as we've just heard. In Ukraine, a stray Russian drone could set fire to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. China could decide to park its nukes in the South China Sea and have a standoff with the Americans. Or North Korea could give us some nuclear technology to Iran, which would launch them immediately against Israel. The advent of nuclear weapons 80 years ago, which no one has mentioned in this week about victory in Europe, hopefully they'll be mentioning it around VJ Day, brought fear, peace, and to the people that had them, power. But it could theoretically be lost in an instant if just one of those governments and the people in them are not decent, if they are not motivated by keeping us safe. There is probably nobody in Britain who, if you were asked them which government is the worst in the world, would say it was their own. And I hesitate to say that because it's my government too. But for 19 years, I've been fortunate enough to know many of the veterans of Britain's Cold War nuclear weapons programme. The Mirror began campaigning for recognition and justice for these veterans and their families in 1984, and they continued through many editors and reporters until the baton was handed to me by accident in 2006. They told me about their illnesses, many of which are exactly the same as you've experienced, their fears for their families, their sense of guilt, and their suspicions about what had happened to them. They gave me their trust, which is something journalists very rarely receive, and in return I told them that they were mistaken. I wrote about their high rates of cancer and blood disorders, the rate of miscarriage in their wives, which is 3 times the national average, and the rate of birth defects in their children, which is 10 times what it normally is. I sat with them as they flicked through their photo albums and showed the mementos of their service in Australia and the Pacific. I had great sympathy for them as people negligently put at risk by their country during a great enterprise and immorally abandoned when that was achieved on the backs of their labour. But when they told me that they were lab rats, the victims of human experiments, it seemed implausible. I said no. I have trawled the archives, I've been through the documents, I told them it's clear they were throwing you at a problem, using you like a piece of laboratory equipment in a desperate bid to get the bomb, treating you, like a Bunsen burner, but you were just nearby. You were too close. You were too uncared for. There is no evidence, I would tell them, that anything else worse than that happened. One widow, actually she's on here, Shirley Denson, just there on my left on that picture, and that's her husband Eric in the photograph. She took that photograph with us in Parliament. We're staying in Westminster Hall when we were campaigning with politicians a few years ago for a medal. Shirley used to tell me, we are the evidence. And I know that's what they all felt. When Barry Smith, who had been the camp hairdresser at Christmas Island after the bombs had finished falling in 1959, contracted a radiogenic cancer, as often seen in Japan among the hibakusha, and he was refused a war pension. I thought he had been extraordinarily mistreated. He was called off his deathbed to go to a war pension appeal hearing where the MOD said, we haven't read the paperwork, can we have an adjournment please? And he only died a few days later. But I could also see there was no evidence of anything else. In my last talk with Barry, which was a few days before he died, he said to me, don't let them get away with it. And I promised him I wouldn't, because what else can you say? But I thought I was fighting the British Ministry of Defence to notice the collateral damage of its biggest weapon. And that was also what lawyers who led repeated court cases thought, the war pensions experts who were dealing with various claims. And there were decades of complaints and investigations. That was the strongest case anyone had been able to come up with against the British state, that it had been thoughtless, that's Barry, that it had been thoughtless, appallingly, cruelly, avoidably thoughtless, but just thoughtless. And in 2022, I got a message which changed everything. The family of a veteran who had recently died were going through his papers and had found a document they thought I might be interested in. This is a memo, there's a close-up bit here, memo from scientists at the Atomic Weapons Establishment staff on Christmas Island in the Pacific, now known as Kiribati, back to AWRE physicists in Aldermaston in Berkshire, discussing the blood tests of squadron leader Terry Gledhill. He led a squadron of sniff planes through 5 separate mushroom clouds on sampling missions for those scientists. And they're discussing the gross irregularity in his blood. At least one man, therefore, when I saw this, I realized one man had been subjected to a human experiment. He had been exposed, monitored, and re-exposed and continually monitored throughout. And that was all while physicists, not medics, not biologists, were looking on, the weapons scientists. Now, the only means of measuring radiation dose, which the British Ministry of Defence has ever admitted to, are film badges. A piece of camera film, usually worn on the jacket, and which, when developed, will show exposures to sources of gamma or beta radiation. Now, these are imperfect. They're not very good. They don't show alpha radiation, which is the principal constituent of fallout, one of the most pernicious things which a lot of the veterans claim they may have been contaminated by. These badges were only given to 23% of the troops anyway, so the vast majority didn't have one to start with. And there's lots of evidence that they have been falsely recorded, underdeveloped, thrown away, otherwise rendered useless. This is a paragraph from a government's own mortality study into the veterans, written in 1988, in which it states that some of the badges were falsified effectively. Up to 4 millisieverts was written down as 0 dose. It is not a 0 dose. That would be equivalent to double your annual background in this country. And they were writing it down as 0, which then went into the scientific studies. But the government said these were limits that were approved by medics, and they showed that the men's health was of paramount importance to the government throughout. Now, testing blood or urine, as happened to Terry, would be the only means of seeing whether radiation had actually entered the men's bodies. The badges were just what was on the outside. Now, they had measured Terry's blood 7 times over 15 months while he flew through these 5 different mushroom clouds, including that of the most powerful weapon Britain's ever fired, codenamed Grapple Y in 1958. It was 3 megatons, which makes it 112 times more powerful in terms of explosive force than Hiroshima. And Terry's blood showed a steady deterioration in the white blood cell count, which is similar to that if you were receiving radiotherapy today, as what you might expect to see. He was pulled out of flying a 6th mission because the effects on his health were so bad. Yet his family told me he had never known these results and had spent years seeking answers for decades of subsequent ill health that were never, ever explained to him. Now, if someone is being repeatedly exposed to radiation while being monitored, that is a human experiment. And many veterans at the time would not have objected to that. They would have felt that was a reasonable thing to do, perhaps, when you are fearing invasion, you're worrying about the effects of fallout. In Terry's case, he was a healthy man. There was no reason for him to be blood tested beyond what he was doing in his day job. And there was no therapeutic benefit to him being irradiated. If you have radiotherapy, you have a benefit of fixing your cancer. That wasn't the case for Terry. And if it happened to the squadron leader, I reasoned, it was probably happening to the rest of the air crew as well. Now, that memo referred to an Air Ministry order, which I managed to dig out of the National Archives. It sets out the limits for blood counts, which Terry had subsequently fallen short of, and dictated that everyone the RAF believed likely to be exposed should be blood tested before, during, and after their service at the tests. You establish a baseline to start with, and you monitor it throughout and see how things have changed. Now, that order has led to, at the last count, more than 30 other similar orders covering thousands of men serving in the Army, the Navy, and the Royal Air Force at 4 different locations over more than a decade. Those orders are each duplicated to dozens of officers, from the task force commanders down to the stores quartermaster. That memo took me back over claims and evidence I had forgotten but heard many years earlier. So there were many veterans who said their medical records were incomplete, which at the time just seemed like bits of old paper have got lost, so what? There was one blood order I had found back in 2018 which became a dead end because we asked questions about it in Parliament and the MOD said, we've got no information about blood testing. And the fact that withholding medical records, I have far more recently come to realise, is both a civil and a criminal offence. It is precisely that sort of thing which blew open the infected blood scandal and Hillsborough, falsifying medical records. Now, after the Mirrors campaign, we'd just spent 4 years fighting for a medal for the nuclear veterans. It's something that involved me in a lot of freedom of information requests to get sort of under the bonnet of the British establishment and try and figure out how it was working and what its rules were and why it was denying any kind of recognition to these men. We won that fight. And a lot of them were very delighted we did. But as the MOD always suspected, and the reason they refused us for so long, is it was the thin end of a wedge they were about to get battered with. The campaign was rebadged as the Nuked Blood Scandal, and finally I was able to get my teeth into what has been there all along. Now, the MOD is a vast organisation, and the Atomic Weapons Establishment, as it's now known, is an arm's-length agency, a PLC, which is technically run by someone else, but is effectively, works hand in glove with government. Its predecessor was the organisation with the scientists that had monitored the men's blood, and it's the current AWE, which holds the historic records of the nuclear weapons programme. So Terry's daughter asked the AWE and the MOD for any records they held on her father. The AWE provided a copy of the memo we already had, and I was able to establish that while it had been available at the National Archives for a few years, only 3 members of the public had ever seen it, one of whom was the veteran who had never realised its significance before he died and whose daughter passed it to me. Now, the MOD refused point blank to provide her with her father's medical records, even when she told them she was his legal executor with a legal right to do so. It went through appeals all the way to a defence minister, with officials giving advice which agreed that they should protect public servants from public rebuke, because we should not even publish the advice that was given to the minister about withholding the records. Public servants should never be exposed to public rebuke, say the public servants. Eventually, an FOI tribunal, and with the help of a friendly barrister, Terry's daughter was able to prove this was all unlawful. A judge ordered the records be made available to her, and a legal precedent was set, which has changed how the MOD today is dealing with historic requests for medical records. Now, Terry's personal file shows further blood tests taken for him in relation to his service at Christmas Island in 1969, 11 years after he returned home. He was still suffering as a result at that time. He was also given repeated chest x-rays. His medical records show there is no clinical reason for this. Although he was later medically discharged from the RAF with a stroke induced by an infection of TB meningitis, his medical records show they could not prove that diagnosis. What we can say for certain is that his blood count would have left him extra vulnerable to infections, and that according to the government mortality studies of the veterans, they have a higher rate of cerebrovascular disease. Now, Terry will never know about this monitoring because he died in 2015. He could have given evidence which would probably have led to his medical records being disclosed when veterans took the government to court in 2007. But government lawyers told the judge he was dead already and therefore was not available to give evidence. He was actually claiming a war pension, so he should have been easy enough for them to find. Now, Terry's memo led us ultimately to a database at the Atomic Weapons Establishment codenamed Merlin. It was created in 2007 to hold evidence of personal injury relevant to that court case. It was collated from various government archives. It was classified as an atomic secret, just like the recipe for building the bombs themselves. It was never made available to veterans' lawyers at repeated legal claims. All they could do was to give a keyword and ask for it to be searched by the Atomic Weapons Establishment. Therefore, if you did not know what you were looking for, you would never find it by accident. Now, at one point, the lawyers did ask about blood testing records. And government lawyers wrote back to say, the planning policy, and I'm going to quote here, the planning policy for the tests indicates the intention was to prevent intake rather than to allow it and monitor the results. No personal records were made. The MOD had a policy not to take blood tests by July 1958. Umpteen of Terry Gledhill's test took place after that date. Now, I managed to establish that Merlin held more than 150 documents about blood and urine testing, about 4,000 pages, give or take. After a debate, the AWE refused to publish any of them whatsoever. They were all highly classified and had proliferative risks. After a debate in Parliament, a minister personally reviewed them and then ordered them to be made public, stating as he did so that AWE held no medical records, and the MOD insisted there were no identifiable individuals in there. These are some of those records that apparently have proliferative risks and are too dangerous to be seen. Information about blood counts before exposure to radiation, chest x-rays, tritium in urine. This is a results of an experiment in which men were told to walk up and down with and without respirators in a fallout zone at Montebello in northwestern Australia in this one's 1958 actually. Report of examinations of natives, blood testing on indigenous people in Australia, more blood examinations for the Grapple Squadron, 1958. All these papers contained evidence of more than 1,000 blood tests that had taken place. They're being discussed in the past tense. Those 30 orders that we found, and 550 at least named individuals being called up for blood testing, told to present themselves at the medical tent. This time, and there was all these experiments about people being ordered to march up and down and so on. That experiment proved that wearing a respirator did make a difference to how much radionuclides was later found in your urine that you excreted. But the MOD did not order everyone to wear a respirator if they went into the forward area in future. They kind of ignored the results of their own study. It also contained copies from faxes, which I'm going to get to, here we are, in 2001. These were sent between AWE and MOD officials, back when fax machines were high-tech. They exchanged copies of the blood testing information and some of what had been done. Then they agreed lines to take, in quote marks, with ministers and the public, insisting that while blood tests had been considered, they never took place. They just weren't necessary. The AWE insisted it did not hold any more documents than the 150 that I'd found. Then I found a list of 370, and they said, oh, those documents. They were just filed differently. I have asked, and I'm still awaiting their release under FOI legislation, but that would be many more thousands of pages. When all this was revealed in a BBC documentary last November, the Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey, was very quick to announce a root and branch review of all the historic documentation that's been held. The Veterans Minister Al Carnes met me and other campaigners and asked for 6 months to get to the bottom of it. We just met him for the 6-month update, and he said there's no budget, no staff, no deadline, and no findings that he felt like divulging to us. Now, it took almost a year, but after the ruling about the unlawful behaviour over Terry Gledhill's medical records, I was able to get the advice that officials had given the minister about it. And they show that while the minister wanted to try and publish this stuff, the officials boxed him in. They told him he didn't have the power to overrule them, they misled him, and they didn't tell him, as they should have done, that any executor has the right to a deceased person's medical record. Now, this has all led to a legal pincer movement against the Ministry of Defence. First, veterans and families are suing it in civil court to produce the medical records it says it does not have. They clearly should have been taken. There were orders for it, and we found some of the results. So whether those records have been lost, are simply missing, whether they've been withheld, or whether destroyed, or perhaps the orders were ignored. Perhaps all the thousands of people on those orders for more than a decade committed a mass act of insubordination that nobody in London noticed and failed to take the blood tests. Even if that happened, the Ministry of Defence still has to compensate and apologise for not being able to produce the blood test now. Now, the harm done, and it was very interesting to see about the psychological impact for the hibakusha. The harm done is both physical in terms of lost lives and illnesses, but also psychological, because the veterans have shown a higher rate of suicide than their peers in every single decade since the tests, which I would suggest may be connected to the fact they've been gaslighted by their government for 70 years and being told that what they experienced is not what happened to them. Now, the current estimated cost of the civil suit to the government, potential payout, would be about $5 billion, which is double the post office scandal. And at just the time when the MOD wants to spend all its money on buying some new toys. It's supported by a crowdfunder, so if anybody here feels like putting a hand in their pocket to help them out, the link is on the screen, and I'll put it up again at the end as well. Secondly, that 2001 fax and the government lawyers telling courts that blood testing didn't take place and the misleading of ministers as recently as last year has led to a criminal complaint to the Metropolitan Police, which we made last week. to satisfy, this is a criminal complaint over allegations of the charges misconduct in public office. That's a very difficult bit of the law to try and pin anything on anybody because it's not written down anywhere as legislation. It's common law offence, so it's the result of many years of custom. To satisfy a charge, it must be proved that a public official has performed their function unlawfully, either knowing or reckless as to the risk of causing harm to a third party. Withholding medical records would appear to fall under that umbrella. Now, that complaint was lodged last week with a suggested list of witnesses, as long as your arm, which includes senior officials and ministers at the Ministry of Defence, the Government Legal Department, and the Atomic Weapons Establishment. I don't stand near the edge of train platforms anymore. It is a strict liability offence. So, like speeding, you do not have to intend to do it. You just need to have done it and perhaps been reckless or not checked that you weren't doing it. The maximum sentence is life imprisonment, depending on the harm done. Now, more recently, Parliament has heard that the Government Legal Department has now written to veterans' lawyers stating that some information may have been recorded by scientists carrying out radiation monitoring rather than the medical professionals who would have been more concerned with the health of military personnel. Now this, as far as the Mirror and the veterans are concerned, is the first time in 70 years that the MOD has admitted that weapons scientists were acting without medical supervision. It means that the UK government has potentially breached about 7 of the 10 rules of the Nuremberg Code: no informed consent, no right to withdraw from the experiment, no due medical supervision, no minimisation of the risk, so on and so forth. And it is also very expensive. I've been asking the MOD exactly what this means, and they can't tell me yet because they're still running about with their arse in a sling. Even if, as the MOD might prefer, that sentence refers to the film badge monitoring, it still means there was no concern for the health of the people being exposed to what everybody already knew was the most deadly material known to man. There is a reason they made weapons out of it. It wasn't because it didn't hurt anybody. It's the opposite of what the MOD has claimed for 70 years, and it's come about only after we found out about these blood tests. And for the avoidance of any doubt, if anyone in this room was feeling ill, who would you like to talk to about it? A medic or a physicist? Now, a parade of ministers have insisted there is no cover-up. The last one said that to my face while I was holding the FOI request, the answer, that he had read and which contained evidence of the cover-up. I've always shared the healthy, often accurate scepticism that cock-ups are far more likely and far more likely to last than any kind of a conspiracy. But a criminal conspiracy merely requires 2 people to agree to do something. And in the case of misconduct, you don't even need to know that it is wrong. And a conspiracy theory, I should point out, is a hypothesis that's been substantiated with evidence. Now, when they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and my colleague here will know more about this than me, I'm sure, the scientists concerned knew there would be survivors who they wanted to monitor. They wanted to know what they could not test in the laboratory, what would happen to a population in the event of a nuclear attack. The only data that existed at that time on the effect of radiation on humans was from accidents, so accidents in the lab by the scientists, perhaps early problems for the people who first discovered radiation at the end of the 19th century, and from radiotherapy of cancer patients, which has been happening since the late 1800s. These scientists needed to know, and the governments needed to know, what would happen on a population level and to people who were not already sick. That was the risk Britain faced, and it was a question to which they did not have an answer. All the people whose pictures I'm putting up, by the way, have died. Now, Dr. Hill will know more about this than me, but I assume anyone not immediately killed or rendered immobile in 1945 would try to flee. Those on the outskirts of the blast may have been able to get away before troops moved in, threw up cordons, started the monitoring process. When other countries began racing for these weapons, they needed their own data on their own populations. Veterans of the US, Russia, Chinese and French nuclear weapons tests all say their medical records seem to be missing. Some countries have admitted conducting experiments and have offered some form of compensation for, in retrospect, what seems absolutely obvious. Britain in particular feared Soviet assault and invasion, and her troops were the only people who could be ordered into the fallout, ordered to stay there for an indefinite period, at risk of being court-martialed or labelled a traitor if they had tried to flee. They were the only people who could be sworn to secrecy, who could be threatened with jail or social disgrace, and the only people who could be experimented upon without medics sticking their Hippocratic oar in and ordered to sail, fly, march, crawl, and live amid the fallout, in many cases for up to a year. If that data was taken, and I'm sure that it will still exist, because it is simply too valuable, too vital for any government to ever destroy it. It is that government, the one that did all this, to its healthiest and most loyal people, and to their families who have fretted for 7 decades over the effects. It's that government which has lied for 70 years, purely to deny them compensation, and perhaps more valuable to them, an apology. It's that government which today contains people prepared and able, perhaps unwittingly even, to cover up while saying there is no cover up, what a very silly idea, while who, as we sit here, holds all of our safety in its hands tonight. It is Britain alone among nuclear powers that has never admitted any wrongdoing while it strove for those nuclear weapons. It's Britain alone that has never compensated its victims, and it's Britain alone that maintains that position, even though its lawyers just made an admission that amounts to using troops in unethical human radiation experiments. And it is Britain alone that has forced its own veterans to fight it to the point where only 10% of them are still alive. They have an average age of 86, and they all suffer a lifetime's burden of grief, guilt, and rage, which they should never have had to suffer. And in many cases, their widows bear it for them. I'll leave you with 2 questions, neither of which I can answer for you. First, is Britain going to tell the truth before or after the last nuclear veteran has died? And secondly, which government is the worst one in the world? I still don't know. Thank you.
Well, we've had 2 fascinating presentations. My congratulations to Daiwa for having the idea of putting these 2 things together. I mean, they do fit together in a rather strange kind of way, but it's not the first thought that would come to mind. But nonetheless, they give interesting and contrasting angles on the same set of questions. I mean, Susie mentioned that she was glad there was a glass of wine coming after this. And it is indeed a sobering subject. And it's one that covers a lot of different angles. And we might tour around some of those angles in the Q&A. I mean, obviously, there's a technical angle here. There's a lot of stuff. And some of you may be interested in inquiring more into the technical aspects of how you know these things. There's a gigantic moral question here. One is about what's the morality of war? That's almost an oxymoron, but if we're going to fight wars, then are there rules about how you fight wars, and what should those rules look like? But there's also a moral question about science. I mean, there is a dark side to science, in which the pursuit of inquiry is the highest value, and the pursuit of knowledge is the highest value. And one can think of quite a few cases where scientists have overstepped the mark in search for that kind of knowledge. So this is not the only case in which that kind of thing has happened. Various kinds of experiments with diseases and such like have had the same effect. So there's a moral question about science here and how that fits into it. There are political questions about rights and about the competence of governments, which you have clearly dug very deeply into. And there are strategic questions here as well. I mean, if you're going to fight wars, what are you going to fight them with? Some people have mentioned that some kinds of weapons are inhumane or unacceptable. But that's actually a surprisingly difficult question. I mean, I may be, morally defective, but I can't see too much difference between being blown up with a nuclear weapon and being shredded by plastic shrapnel. I mean, there's any number of particularly nasty weapons out there which you could easily describe as inhumane. The whole process of war is inhumane, as we know from looking at the news in Ukraine. So there are awkward questions here. There are questions about the practices of war, and if you're going to accept war as being something that human beings do, then weapons are part of that. And then how do you draw lines in that kind of territory? So there's a lot of interesting terrain around these talks, and I think I will open the floor now.